Okay, my friends, let's get going. It's Monday, June 10th, 2024. David Parsons here with a couple quick hit news trap excerpts for you. Talking about cars a lot lately, I know. Electric cars are one element of that, but I did a History of America in 6 Cars series last year or a few months ago on Nostalgia Trap, if you want to go check that out. But the main thesis of that series, for those that didn't listen to all those episodes, is that the history of automobile manufacturing in many ways is the history of the 20th century and beyond. And you can sort of track these eras in auto manufacturing, not only in America, but globally, as a way of as an entryway into thinking about history and as an entryway into thinking about like what we're doing on this planet. Cars are a precious commodity. And I know we've switched to tech as being the kind of like central driver of the global economy, but that's changing cars. And as cars and tech sort of merge, it's fucking with that story. And people are, and when I say people, I say like American consumers, global consumers, people who buy and drive cars are going through something. They're going through something in which we're seeing like this conversion of cars into computers, and not everybody's super happy about it. And I want to talk about a couple issues from this Wall Street Journal piece that's sort of tracking consumer attitudes about cars and what's changing with EVs. So listen to this, and this totally has to do with like nostalgia and analog and all that stuff of like that we've been talking about on the show and other people have been talking about too, which is this sort of growing desire among a lot of people, young people, older people. I think it's not necessarily generationally bound, but like a desire to like retreat from tech and get into analog stuff. I was just out with some young people last night who were talking about how they like to play slow games, like role-playing games and board games. And when they go to bars and when they hang out at home, they don't necessarily have tech as the central thing they're doing. They're not necessarily just scrolling through TikTok and Netflix. They want to like play tactile games. That's something I'm deeply interested in. That sort of like the receding from the tech world, and that happening sort of among the population rather than being driven from above. So I didn't mean to say driven there. It's hard to avoid the puns when talking about engines and cars and things like that. But listen to this. Many buyers are now surfing on waves of vehicle depreciation, picking up used and off-lease cars and trucks still under warranty for thousands less than new. That's smart. Your Dutch uncle approves. But lately, another stranger element is showing up in the numbers. A motivated belief among consumers that automakers' latest and greatest offerings, whether powered by gasoline, batteries, or a hybrid system, are inferior to the products they are replacing. So there's a desire for older cars because the older cars don't have all this sort of like bullshit, hybrid, EV, awful computer system connected to it. And there's a desire to like go back and like, I just want a fucking Toyota Corolla from 1995, right? To me, actually, my dream car, if anyone wants to buy one for me, is a 1995 Toyota Camry. But I guess I'm not alone in like sort of desiring a previous era of American manufacturing. So listen to this. In fact, new car deniers form a broad coalition of the unpersuaded. Some fear that new, digitally connected vehicles could expose their personal information to the Chinese, or worse, to their insurance agencies. Other modern marvels people seem eager to avoid include stop-start cycling systems, which shut off engines to save fuel when vehicles are stationary, now all but mandatory in new vehicles, continuously variable transmissions, or CVTs, commonly found in compact vehicles with small displacement engines, and diesel exhaust fluid, or DEF, a post-combustion exhaust treatment that modern turbo diesel engines can't live without. So this sounds a lot like the 1970s in American auto manufacturing. And if you know, the 1970s were a depressed moment in the American economy. And it was also a depressed moment like culturally and politically, right? Like the 70s are like the hangover from Vietnam and Watergate and finding out that like the CIA were just a bunch of like corrupt murderers all around the world. There was a kind of like, there was a bummer in the 70s, right? That's how Reagan won in the 80s, by being like, I'm going to cure the bummer and make us great again. That cycle was happening in the 70s, and cars had so much to do with it. I mean, talk to anybody who was alive during that era about cars in the 70s. Yeah, gas lines are one element of it, right? That like gas became very rare and expensive because of shit going on in the Middle East. That was in the late 70s, but it was really like the early to mid 70s that you start to see cars decline in quality. And that was entirely because the government was creating new regulations around not what they called climate change at the time, but like emissions standards and safety standards. I did a whole episode about this, so go check it out. But the basic idea is that the auto manufacturers in America were not ready for those regulations. They dropped the ball. Labor had something to do with this as well. But the bottom line for the American consumer is that cars sucked in the 70s, and the result of that was, you know, a lot of political fallout, a lot of ennui, a lot of like, wow, we suck because we can't make good cars anymore. And that's happening now. And it's really interesting that people would want to like actually go back in time. And I think people wanted that then too. They sort of wanted to go back in time to like the cars of particularly the 50s and 60s. So here's some more about cars today. Those carefree, under-regulated days are over. The past decade has seen car makers retire large and thirsty V8s for smaller and more efficient V6s and even i4s, equipped with forced induction, typically involving one or two turbochargers and a daisy chain of sensors, control modules, and codeware. Many such power plants require premium fuel to work properly. The regulatory hill for IC power only gets steeper from here. By 2032, gas-burning vehicles will need robust hybrid and plug-in hybrid systems in order for automakers to avoid non-compliance penalties. The number of potential failure points will grow dramatically. This is one of the many reasons I encourage consumers to jump to EVs and avoid the bitter end of combustion technology. So I love that phrase, the bitter end of combustion technology, because this is like the next phase of what happened in the 70s. Because in the 70s, we confronted how dangerous the combustion engine was to the health of people and the health of the planet. And it's been decades. And now we're going to actually put the nail in the coffin of the combustion engine, allegedly. I'm not putting out that prediction that it's actually going to happen because EVs have a lot of problems. And the electric vehicle thing, I mean, let's just say it. Electric vehicles fucking suck. They don't operate in the same way as internal combustion engine vehicles. They're not as fucking cool, man. They don't got the same sound. They don't got, like, I want to burn fuel. I want to know that I'm killing the planet while I'm doing this. I'm joking. But, like, there is something about the sort of visceral element of driving a car that is being missed by all of these changes. In other words, the reason consumers are turning away from electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles and all these computerized vehicles, a certain section of American consumers, you know, have a romance attached to the car. And that's not entirely from the consumer. That's something that has been part of American culture for decades. A car is not just a fucking computer or phone. A car is something that straps you into the romance of being alive and the romance of the American project. And EVs don't cut it. They fucking suck. They're not American. I've said this many times, and I'm not saying this to be like jingoistic or patriotic and be like, cars need to be American. I'm saying that something is changing here in the way we relate to vehicles. And it's something that you can see consumers sort of balking at, in part because EVs, hybrid vehicles, get deeply away from any feeling of romance or excitement or fun of the road. So let's continue here because there are a few other things, a few other elements of this story that are worth thinking about. Change is hard, whether it's under the hood or in the cabin. Used car intenders reserve special loathing for the touchscreen displays and capacitive switches that are now ubiquitous in new cars, regardless of price. The virtualization of once simple, reachable controls into phone-like menus has left many exasperated. I rented a brand new Kia Sorento last week and it made me love my last gen Tahoe that much more, says John Lindsay, an attorney in Davis, California. The UX completely confounded me to the point where it was more distracting than useful. And then distraction is a key part of this, right? Like by turning the vehicle into a phone, if you've ever been in a Tesla, it's like riding in an iPhone. By turning the vehicle into the phone, you're like making the car a distraction device rather than something that gets you from point A to point B. And that's like, that's fucking with the whole like ontology of what a car is. And this piece actually gets into that part of it. Listen to this. For some, the risk is the potential for eyes off the road distraction. For others, it's an ineffable loss of affinity and connection, a charisma gap widening between analog and computerized automobiles. Speaking, quote, as one of those grumpy old guys, wrote Brock Yates Jr., organizer of the annual One Lap of America road race, new vehicles are overladen with intrusive nannies and technologies designed for the lowest level of unskilled and distracted drivers, which sadly seems to me most drivers we share the highways with. Some even refuse to call them cars. They are tools that are reliable to move you physically, but no longer emotionally, says Bob Burns, an off-road driving instructor. The excitement of a new car comes from how it can occupy you while you move from point A and point B and relieve you from the arduous task of driving. So it's like, again, extracting something human out of this, extracting that, like what they call affinity and connection and charisma that you have with an analog vehicle. It's not there with the computerized vehicle. And the distraction thing is so fucking important. I don't know if you drive on the road, but it's something I've noticed since pandemic. It's that and it's not just me. I've talked to lots of other people who've noticed this. No one knows how to fucking drive anymore. There are people weaving around the lanes all over the place. Sometimes you just see people like stopped in lanes, going 10 miles per hour on the highway. Invariably, when you catch up to these people, they're staring at a fucking phone. They're staring at the computer display that's on the front of their vehicle. All of it seems like it encourages a kind of disconnect from the car itself, and that part of it is really disturbing. Being raised in Southern California, I'm surrounded by a nostalgia trap of old boomer men who love old cars. So I'm not immune to the whole nostalgia trap element of this. But what I'm saying is there's kind of a reason for nostalgia traps. Sometimes things were better in the past. And that's sort of like the culture of men specifically. It's women too. I mean, I taught a class on these cars to an older population. There were tons of women in the class who shared so many stories about cars and what they meant to them and the stories they had about things that had happened to them in cars or relationships they had had that were built on cars. I mean, it's kind of incredible. But either way, it feels like that culture is being lost. And that part of it, that is just another part of like tech culture sort of washing out the romance and affinity. Like nobody loves their iPhone. Nobody looks at their iPhone and says, man, I'll never forget the first day I got my iPhone. Man, what a beauty she was. No one. Nobody loves this technology. And the fact that we're integrating this tech into cars and people are now hating the cars tells you how much people really don't like tech. It fucking sucks. It makes the world worse. It distracts people into a world that takes them out of this world. And I haven't even mentioned the fucking just straight danger of that. I'm just talking in romantic terms here. The idea that people are not driving anymore, really, but they're staring at the fucking computer or their phone is disturbing. I mean, if you've ever ridden in a Tesla and done like any of the like minimal auto self-driving shit, it's kind of terrifying because the driver is just kind of like chilling and the car is running itself and you're sort of like staring more at the cartoon images on this amazing Tesla display than what's right in front of you. And to me, that's such a brilliant metaphor for our historical moment, right? Everybody's staring at fucking screens rather than seeing what's right in front of them, and that being a kind of dangerous historical moment to occupy. Okay, so a few last things on cars here. Charisma has been banished to the used car lot. Automakers, under pressure to invest in electric vehicle manufacturing while also delivering reliable dividends, have slashed the diversity of models they offer, allowing them to focus on the most remunerative segments, pickups, SUVs, and crossovers, while abandoning less profitable ones. Only a generation ago, the new car market was a zoonomia of kinky, affordable vehicles and body styles such as the Honda Element and Scion XB. Now just try finding a family station wagon, a large sedan, or a small pickup, a small anything for that matter. For their part, automakers have weighed these discontents and decided they were not worth addressing. Take touchscreen displays. With the rise of GPS mapping and mobile communications in the early part of the century, Consumers demanded connected car features and services. As soon as they got them, it became clear they were going to need help coping with the driver distraction and cognitive load. Thus were born advanced driver assist systems, or ADAs, such as automatic lane keeping, emergency braking, and blind spot detection. Along the way, many aspects of cars' driving character, including suspension, transmission, and stability control, became configurable. These are bells that can't be unrung. If I were to put a button for everything, the cabin would look like an old 747, Maserati's global head of design, Klaus Buse, told The Drive magazine in a recent interview. And besides, he might have added but didn't, touchscreens are cheaper. So there is the sense that like this is cheaping out the shit. The way I feel about cars today, like new cars, 2022, 2023 models, they're kind of like the way that cell phones were like right before the smartphone came, meaning that like there was all this sort of like tech innovation of these cell phones that were like the bricks, the flip phones. I'm talking about like the Razr phone. Anyone remember that one? They were like just like it was like cheap shit, but it was meant to look like techie. It was meant to fool you in some way. I mean, everyone knows how I feel about AI. I think AI is like this as well, where it's sort of a trick. It's meant to fool you into thinking it's more than it is. But these cars, I think consumers are looking right through them and not liking them. And I just thought that was an interesting take on the whole nostalgia trap notion, right? That we're like, consumers are looking at this shit and being like, I don't want it. I don't want a fucking computer car. And the idea that the cars have to like correct your distractions now, like they have to like watch out for you because they know that you're not driving the car, says a lot. Like, why did we do this? Why did we create cars and with so many distractions that people aren't encouraged to drive anymore? That's disturbing. It's like human beings are being like written out of the story of history in some way, and cars are telling one part of that. Okay, a couple other things I want to mention before we go. Last week I talked a lot about this sort of like economic splits that are happening among the American population, where people are like, you know, freaking out about the economy. At the same time, people are spending lots of money, and the rich are richer than ever. And it's sort of confusing going into an election. Like, what are we really saying? Like, what is really happening with inflation and all of that? There's some interesting takes on that in the Wall Street Journal this morning about, you know, how consumers are spending, because despite the fact that Americans are complaining a lot about inflation and the price of food and all of those things and blaming Biden entirely for it, Americans are spending like crazy right now. So there's something like disingenuous or weird splits happening in the electorate. Listen to this. The average household spent nearly 53% of its food budget on food away from home last year, a record high proportion, and up 10 percentage points from 2003, according to the U.S. Agricultural Department Economic Research Service. Total restaurant sales have never been higher. They're on track to top $1.1 trillion this year, a 5.4% increase from 2023's record high level, according to the National Restaurant Association and Industry Group. So that's amazing. It's sort of like this notion that's sort of become a consensus that everything sucks and everything's expensive because Joe fucking Biden created inflation somehow with his magical inflation lever. And yet, as Americans complain more and more about the fact that they have no money, they're fucking partying and going out more than ever before. We are spending money hand over fist. So it's like the idea that like, okay, we have no money and it's Joe Biden's fault. I can't afford food. I'm starving. Okay, then why are you spending 53% of your fucking monthly food budget on going out to restaurants, right? There's like this sort of like the American consumer really just seems like the Karen of the world to me. The people who want everything, and if they get slightly less or they feel some way that they've been slighted in some way, like, why is the coffee a little more expensive? It's like, fuck you. I want to talk to the fucking manager. Where's Joe Biden? I want all my shit for as cheap as fucking possible. So it's like we've been trained to expect so fucking much in America, and if it slightly changes at all, we fucking get pissed and blame the president. I mean, I think Donald Trump would get this smoke too if the inflation were happening. I don't think it's necessarily a partisan thing. It's more about like the American consumer and the expectations they have of being able to go out to eat every fucking day and make those service workers make me that food. You know, the idea that we have everything here, and if that changes at all, we complain and blame the president. There's something really, really fickle and fucking gross about that, because Americans right now are spending shitloads. There's more to this. Listen to the cruises. There's an excerpt here about how many people are going on cruises right now. More retailers, food makers, and restaurants that raised prices. Well, this isn't the cruise thing. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, no, it is. Sorry. More retailers, food makers, and restaurants that raised prices rapidly over the last 3 years are reporting greater resistance to increases, including Starbucks, McDonald's, and Kraft Heinz. But cruise lines are reporting record bookings. The consumer is saying, I'm not going to buy a $10 fast food cheeseburger, but I am going to go on this 6-day cruise that I really want to take. So, the sort of like post-pandemic spending spree that Americans are still on, where they're sort of like, YOLO, I don't give a fuck. I'm going to like zip my credit card and go on a cruise. I'm going to Vegas. I'm going to go see the Formula One thing. People are spending. And obviously not everyone. We're talking about middle-class people who have money and access to credit cards and access to debt. They're spending like fucking crazy. And that sort of bifurcation of like, well, it's the worst of times right now. The economy is bad. Rent is out of control. Food is expensive. And it's all Joe Biden's fault. At the same time, we're on like a spending spree where we're going on vacations and going out to eat all the time. Are these all the same people? That's what I'd like to know. Because Americans are fucking living large right now and yet bitching about the economy constantly. There's something weird about it. I can't help but think that Americans have like insanely high expectations about what life is like supposed to be like. That's not to say I'm not appalled by the high rent and the food and everything else. I just think there's something really fickle about the American consumer that I'm pointing out here. It's like, why isn't the food cheaper? Why isn't the food cheaper? Like that part of it, I don't know. There's some entitled twats out there. I'll put it that way, and it's not everybody. But I think the main point is that we're talking about middle-class people here. Like, the middle class itself is split, and the middle-class thing is, this is where those entitled people are, right? So, you have an expectation you're a middle-class person to be able to spend your money on all these things, but not every middle-class person can do that, and I think that's part of the politics here. And how that trickles into the culture war and Joe Biden and all that is what we're seeing. But it kind of drives me crazy because when you look at the numbers, Americans are just fucking rolling in it right now, and that's kind of bizarre. Okay, one last thing. There's a great internet comment of the day for me about AI. I love when people rip AI apart. Obviously, I'm kind of like looking at AI as a pile of bullshit, and the idea that we're going to strap our economy to this bullshit and watch everything else go to hell is absolutely insane. It's sort of like the apotheosis of all of this tech garbage is now we all are supposed to buy into AI and be afraid of it. Well, listen to this internet comment. Whoever this is got it right. I love this. I swear, if I see one more article from some expert with a headline that screams about AI taking everyone's job except those of us who are wise enough to learn how to use AI, I will write a strongly worded letter to the publisher because it's the publisher's fault for letting that garbage through for the clicks. I can explain why the AI dystopia isn't true in 3 words. Movies aren't real. AI is not Skynet. We're not living in the Matrix. We're not obligated to welcome our new open AI overlords. The current evolution of Gen AI is not going to be the AI that universally replaces knowledge-based labor. What they're selling as the AI function of today's generative AI can be more closely described as powerful computers doing if-then statements really fast than sentient. The wrong people are in charge. That's what this all boils down to. The people in charge of telling the story of tech are selling the most dystopian story imaginable. The people in charge of cutting the checks are chasing a swinging pendulum and scared of getting burned again. The people in charge of building the tech are understaffed, underskilled, and overconfident. Yeah, if you drop this quagmire into my hands, I'd start erasing the board too. It's unavoidable. So I love that, and I love the sort of growing skepticism and even hatred of our quote-unquote AI overlords, because people like Sam Altman should not be in control of our world, and yet they are. They're not in control, but they have a stunning degree of power. and leverage at a moment where we don't need that shit. I'm waiting. I am waiting for, like, to me, one of the big revolutions I'm waiting for beyond the, like, revolution of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie is the sort of anti-tech revolution, which I might proffer and maybe offer as the same thing, right? Like, the bourgeoisie, the rich, they are the tech people, right? That is what's happening. They are setting the agenda. They always have, and tech just happens to be the way they're setting it for our time. Okay, I'm gonna stop. I thank you for checking in with me on a Monday morning. We have lots more to get through this week, so I'll see you tomorrow. I hope you're having a good day. Bye-bye.